I've been wrestling with whether to write this for a while. I've always known my mom's habits weren't exactly normal, but it's only now, as I'm approaching some big life changes, that I realize how deeply they affect me. I'm in my early 30s, recently engaged, and planning to start a family soon. You'd think this would be the happiest time of my life, and in many ways, it is. But my relationship with my mom complicates everything. My mom, let's call her Karen, because, well, it fits, is in her early 60s and has what I can only describe as the opposite of hoarding disorder. She's a compulsive declutterer. If she can see it, it bothers her. If she thinks it's out of place, it's gone. Drawers, cabinets, and the trash bin are her best friends. As a kid, I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew that things I loved, books, toys, clothes, would vanish, only to reappear at Goodwill if I got lucky enough to retrieve them in time. This behavior isn't just a quirk. It's compulsive. It doesn't matter if something is useful, sentimental, or expensive. If it doesn't have a designated place, my mom considers it clutter and feels an overwhelming need to get rid of it. My dad gave up years ago. He has a shopping addiction, so between his purchases and her purges, their home is a revolving door of stuff. He banned her from touching his tools, and she hasn't set foot in the garage in over a decade. The breaking point for me came about 10 years ago when I had some telescope lenses sitting on a dresser. I was at work when she texted me to ask if I was cleaning them. I told her no and didn't think much of it. When I got home, the lenses were gone. My heart sank. I called her immediately, and she casually told me she'd taken them to Goodwill. I thought you left them out to donate, she said, as if that explained everything. That was it for me. I got her a hotel room for the rest of her visit and told her she wasn't welcome in my home until she sought professional help. Her response? She willingly stayed at the hotel every time she visited after that, acting like nothing had happened. She's never brought up the incident again. Now, 10 years later, things are coming to a head. My mom has started asking why I won't let her stay over, and I can tell it bothers her. She says she doesn't do this at my brother's house, so I shouldn't be worried. But my brother has a huge house with spare rooms to hide stuff in, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with a maximalist decorating style. I can't risk leaving her unsupervised in my home. The thing is, I want her in my life. Aside from this one issue, we have a good relationship. I want her to be a normal grandparent to my future children, and I know I'll need help after giving birth. But how can I let her in when I can't trust her not to throw my life away, literally? To really explain how this issue got to where it is today, I need to go back to my childhood. Growing up, I didn't have a name for what my mom was doing, but I always felt like something was off. Most of my friends' homes felt warm and lived in, filled with knickknacks, family photos, and the occasional clutter. Our house, on the other hand, always looked like a showroom. Pristine. Perfect. Sterile. At first, I thought this was just how some families were. Maybe we were just super clean. But it wasn't cleanliness driving my mom, it was a deep-seated need to purge. She couldn't relax unless every visible object was put away. And if something didn't have a designated spot, it didn't belong in the house. I can't even count how many times I came home from school to find my room completely rearranged. Books, toys, clothes, even furniture, gone without warning. I'd ask where something was, and she'd shrug and say, "You weren't using it," or, "It was taking up space." My favorite stuffed animal as a kid? Donated. My collection of comic books? Vanished. Once, she even got rid of a science fair project while I was still working on it. It wasn't just my stuff, either. My dad would come home to find his tools missing, his golf clubs gone, or a jacket he'd left by the door mysteriously absent. He'd grumble about it, but he never really confronted her. My dad's shopping addiction didn't help. He'd buy stuff we didn't need, and she'd purge it just as quickly. It was like a never-ending tug of war, and I was caught in the middle. The worst part was how normal she made it seem. "People have too much stuff," she'd say. "We don't need all this clutter." She acted like she was doing us a favor, like her compulsive decluttering was a moral high ground. And, honestly, as a kid, I started to believe her. For years, I thought I was the problem. I thought maybe I was too attached to material things, too sentimental. I started hiding my favorite belongings, tucking them away in drawers or under my bed, hoping she wouldn't find them. Sometimes it worked, most of the time, it didn't. When I got older, I started fighting back. I'd go to Goodwill and buy my stuff back. At one point, the employees recognized me and started holding on to anything my mom brought in, just in case I showed up looking for it. It was humiliating, but it was the only way to keep my things. I didn't realize how much this shaped me until I moved out. When I got my first apartment, I felt an overwhelming need to fill it with stuff, books, art, plants, sentimental knickknacks. I wanted my space to feel alive, to have personality, to reflect who I was. I guess, in some way, I was rebelling against her sterile, minimalist obsession. But the problem didn't stop when I moved out. My mom still found ways to insert herself. She'd visit, take one look at my place, and say, "You have too much stuff." At first, I laughed it off. But then came the telescope lens incident. That was the final straw. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. Her compulsion wasn't just inconvenient, it was damaging. She didn't respect my boundaries, my belongings, or my autonomy. That's when I realized I needed to draw a line. Looking back, I think my mom's behavior stems from some kind of anxiety. She's never been officially diagnosed, but it's clear that decluttering is how she copes with stress. If she's feeling overwhelmed or out of control, she focuses on her surroundings. Getting rid of things gives her a sense of order, a sense of control. But that doesn't make it okay. Just because I understand why she does it doesn't mean I can let her keep doing it, especially not in my home. Now, as I'm preparing for marriage and thinking about starting a family, I'm stuck. I want her to be part of my life, but I can't let her into my home as long as this behavior continues. The question is, can she change? Fast forward to now, I'm in my early 30s, engaged to an amazing man, and planning the next chapter of my life. We live in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment, which we've decorated to reflect both of our personalities. I'm a maximalist. I love having shelves filled with books, artwork on every wall, and sentimental objects displayed throughout the space. It's my version of comfort, a direct rebellion against the sterile environment I grew up in. But this brings me to my current problem, my mom. Over the past decade, I've kept her at arm's length when it comes to my living space. After the telescope lens fiasco, I made a hard rule: she wasn't allowed in my home without supervision. I couldn't trust her not to throw things out, and I wasn't willing to go through the emotional and financial toll of replacing my belongings. To her credit, she hasn't pushed back much. She stays in a hotel when she visits and acts like everything is fine, which is both a blessing and deeply frustrating. It's like she's completely erased the incident from her memory. But now, things are changing. My fiancé and I are planning to start a family soon, and my mom has started hinting, no, outright saying, that she wants to be more involved. She's brought up the fact that I haven't let her stay over in years and questioned why I still have such a strict rule in place. "It's been 10 years, she said during her last visit. Don't you think it's time to move on?" Move on? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She acts like this is something I need to get over, as if her behavior isn't the root cause of the issue. I tried to explain, again, that I can't leave her unattended in my home because she can't be trusted not to throw things out. She dismissed it, saying, "I don't do that anymore. You're just holding on to the past." But here's the thing, I don't believe her. She claims she doesn't do this at my brother's house, which is technically true. My brother lives in a sprawling suburban home with multiple guest rooms and plenty of space to hide things. When my mom visits, they clear out a room and stash away anything she might consider clutter. It's a system that works for them, but it's not feasible for me. I live in a small apartment, and I don't have the luxury of empty rooms or hiding places. Plus, I can't shake the suspicion that her behavior at my brother's house is more about appearances than actual change. My sister-in-law's family is locally influential, and my mom has always been obsessed with maintaining a certain image. I suspect she's on her best behavior there because she's afraid of how my sister-in-law's parents might perceive her. Meanwhile, my fiancé's parents live overseas and don't speak much English. If my mom were to visit after we have kids, there wouldn't be anyone around to call her out on her behavior. It would just be me, my husband, and our baby, completely at her mercy. And this isn't just about me anymore. I want my mom to have a normal relationship with her future grandchildren. I want her to be part of their lives, to stay with us when we need help after the baby is born. But how can I let her in when I know she might throw out my child's belongings the moment they're left out? I've tried to imagine different ways this could work. Maybe I could lock certain rooms and only let her access the ones we can declutter beforehand. But even then, I'd be on edge the entire time, wondering if she'd sneak into other areas while I wasn't looking. It's exhausting to think about, and it feels so unfair. I shouldn't have to childproof my home for my own mother. As much as I want to give her another chance, I keep coming back to the same conclusion: nothing has changed. She's never acknowledged that what she did was wrong. She's never apologized or sought help. Without that accountability, how can I trust that she won't do it again? I know I need to make a decision soon. My fiancé is supportive but understandably cautious. He's seen how stressed I get whenever my mom is involved, and he doesn't want that energy in our home, especially not with a baby on the way. At the same time, he knows how much I value family, and he doesn't want to be the reason I cut ties with my mom. I feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do I hold firm on my boundaries and risk damaging my relationship with my mom? Or do I let her back in and hope, against all odds, that she's truly changed? As much as I struggle with my mom's behavior, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand her side of things. What makes someone feel such an overwhelming need to purge their surroundings? Why is her compulsion so deeply rooted that she'll risk relationships over it? From what I can tell, my mom doesn't see her actions as harmful, at all. In her mind, she's doing everyone a favor. To her, decluttering is a virtue, a way to restore order and calm in a chaotic world. She genuinely believes that modern society is too materialistic, that people are weighed down by their attachments to stuff. It's just things, she's told me countless times. Why let it control you? The problem is, she doesn't recognize the difference between her feelings about possessions and everyone else's. What she sees as junk, I see as sentimental, practical, or just plain enjoyable. She can't, or won't, acknowledge that her actions have hurt the people around her. This denial extends to her view of herself. My mom prides herself on being modern and efficient. She'll point to Marie Kondo or minimalist influencers as evidence that she's ahead of the curve. But she's not tidying up for joy or simplicity, she's compulsively eliminating anything she deems unnecessary. And if you dare challenge her, you're the problem. I've tried to talk to her about this over the years, but it's like hitting a brick wall. She gets defensive, turning the conversation back on me. You're too attached to things, she'll say. You need to let go. Or, worse, she'll downplay the entire issue, laughing it off like it's no big deal. This denial isn't just frustrating, it's isolating. If she can't even admit there's a problem, how can I trust her to change? And then there's the glaring inconsistency, her behavior at my brother's house. She's quick to remind me that she doesn't declutter there, as if that's proof she's reformed. But I can't ignore the context. My brother, Matt, lives in a massive house with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids. When my mom visits, they prepare for her like it's a military operation. They sweep clutter into storage rooms, hide toys in the basement, and make sure every surface is pristine. It's a temporary illusion of minimalism, designed to keep her calm and out of their hair. Sarah once confided in me that they've had a few close calls. My mom apparently, accidentally, threw out some old family photos that Sarah had left on the kitchen counter. My brother retrieved them from the trash before it became a full-blown incident, but it's clear that her tendencies haven't disappeared. So why does my mom behave better at their house? I have a theory: appearances. Sarah's parents are well known in their community, active in local politics, respected business owners, the kind of people you don't want to offend. My mom is hyper-aware of this and has likely toned down her behavior to avoid embarrassing herself. Unfortunately, I don't have that same leverage. My fiancé's parents live overseas, and while they're lovely people, they're not part of my mom's world. She doesn't care what they think, and that makes me feel like she'd have free rein to do whatever she wanted in my home. It's also hard not to feel a little resentful. Why does my mom go out of her way to behave at my brother's house but refuses to show me the same respect? Is it because I've set firmer boundaries? Or does she genuinely think I'm overreacting and don't deserve the same effort? Despite all this, I know my mom's intentions aren't malicious. She's not trying to hurt me or sabotage my life. She genuinely believes she's helping. But good intentions don't erase the impact of her actions. And without any acknowledgement of the problem, I can't trust her to stay in my home. Still, I can't help but wonder, what would it take for her to change? Could therapy help her understand why she feels the need to declutter so compulsively? Could she learn to respect my boundaries, even if she doesn't agree with them? Or is this just who she is, and I need to accept it? For now, I'm left with more questions than answers. I want to believe my mom is capable of change, but I've yet to see any real evidence of it. And as much as I want her in my life, I can't ignore the risks of letting her back into my home. After my mom's last visit and her pointed comments about how I hadn't let her stay over in a decade, I realized it was time to try again. I couldn't just keep avoiding the issue. She wasn't going to stop bringing it up, and with my wedding and plans for children on the horizon, this problem was only going to grow. So, I decided to have an honest conversation with her. I called her one evening, steeling myself for what I knew would be a difficult discussion. "Mom," I began, "we need to talk about why I haven't let you stay at my place. I know you've brought it up a few times now, and I think it's important we address it." Her response was immediate and defensive. "Oh, not this again. It's been years. Can't you just let it go?" I took a deep breath, trying not to let her tone derail me. "It's not about holding a grudge. It's about trust. You've thrown out my things without asking before, and I need to know that won't happen again." She sighed heavily. "I told you, I don't do that anymore. I've changed. You're just stuck in the past." This was the same argument she always used, and it was maddening. "But how do I know that, Mom? You've never apologized or acknowledged what happened. How can I believe things will be different now?" For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry for trying to help you live a less cluttered life?" It wasn't exactly the apology I was hoping for. "Mom," I said carefully, "it's not about clutter. It's about respect. When you throw things out without asking, it feels like you don't respect me or my choices." She scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Of course, I respect you. I'm your mother." I could feel my frustration building, but I forced myself to stay calm. "If you respect me, then you need to respect my boundaries. That means not touching my things unless I say it's okay." She didn't respond right away, but I could hear her exhale sharply. Finally, she said, "Fine. If it's such a big deal to you, I won't touch anything. Happy?" It wasn't exactly the heartfelt agreement I was looking for, but it was a start. "Thank you," I said, even though I wasn't sure how much I believed her. "But I think we need to put some safeguards in place, just to make sure we're on the same page." She bristled at that. "What kind of safeguards are we talking about?" I explained that if she wanted to stay over, we'd need to have clear rules in place. Things like 1. No touching or moving anything without asking. 2. No throwing things out, even if she thought they were trash. 3. If she felt stressed or uncomfortable, she needed to talk to me instead of taking matters into her own hands. She didn't like the idea. "You're treating me like a child," she said indignantly. No, Mom, I replied. I'm treating you like someone I want to have a healthy relationship with. This isn't about control, it's about trust. Eventually, she reluctantly agreed to my terms, though I could tell she wasn't happy about it. She made a point of saying, "This is ridiculous, but if it'll make you feel better, I'll go along with it." I felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by doubt. Would she actually stick to the rules, or was this just lip service? Only time would tell. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a band-aid on a much deeper wound. Yes, we'd had the conversation, and yes, she'd agreed to my terms. But the underlying issue, her refusal to acknowledge her compulsions as a problem, was still unresolved. What's more, I realized I wasn't just worried about her throwing out my stuff. I was worried about what this meant for the future. If she couldn't respect my boundaries now, how could I trust her around my future children? Would she decide their toys were clutter and get rid of them too? Would she undermine me as a parent the same way she undermined me as a child? The thought was overwhelming. For the first time, I started to seriously consider the possibility that I might need to keep her at arm's length indefinitely. It wasn't what I wanted. I love my mom, and I want her to be part of my life. But I couldn't ignore the toll this was taking on me. Still, I wasn't ready to give up just yet. The next step would be putting our agreement to the test. If she could follow the rules during her next visit, maybe there was hope. If not, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. After my conversation with my mom, I spent the next few weeks cautiously optimistic. She had agreed to the terms, no throwing out anything, no moving things without asking, and talking to me if she felt stressed. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward. Now, it was time for the real test. Would she be able to follow through when she actually stayed at my apartment? The moment arrived when my mom called and said she'd be in town for a weekend. I had prepared myself as best as I could, but my nerves were already fraying. Would she respect the rules? Would she sneak into rooms I'd asked her not to? And, more importantly, would I feel safe letting her into my space again after all the damage had been done? I spent the week before her arrival preparing my apartment. I didn't want to make the same mistake of leaving anything vulnerable to being tossed out, so I went through every room, made sure everything I valued was stored safely, and even locked up a few things in cabinets I rarely opened. I was on high alert. When my mom arrived, I greeted her with a smile, but my stomach was tied in knots. She was cheerful, as usual, but there was a noticeable tension in the air. I think she could tell I was uneasy, though she didn't say anything about it. She settled in, and I made sure to follow through on the boundaries I had set. I reminded her, gently but firmly, that if she needed something, she could ask me instead of going through drawers or moving anything on her own. She agreed and nodded, though she didn't look thrilled. The first night was relatively uneventful. We had dinner together, and she seemed to enjoy herself. I tried to keep the conversation light, but in the back of my mind, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Would she go into my bedroom and start rearranging my bookshelves? Would she look through my closet and start tossing out clothes she thought were unnecessary? To my relief, she didn't do anything out of the ordinary, at least, not that I could tell. But the next day, things started to unravel. I had planned a small outing to a local cafe, and when we came back, I noticed something was off. The living room was quieter. The books I had left out on the coffee table were gone. My favorite ceramic mug, the one I always use for coffee in the morning, was missing from the counter. I immediately felt a wave of panic. My heart raced as I went through the apartment, checking the places I had carefully arranged everything. My favorite mug was nowhere to be found, and several other small items were missing as well. I opened a drawer I knew I hadn't touched that morning, and sure enough, the books I'd left out had been stuffed inside. I felt the blood drain from my face. I walked into the kitchen, my voice shaky, and asked, "Mom, did you move my things? Where's my mug?" She froze for a moment, then looked guilty. "Oh, I thought they were in the way. The books were just sitting there, and your mug was on the counter for so long, it seemed like you weren't using it." I thought you didn't need it. I could feel my stomach twisting. Mom, we agreed, you're not supposed to touch anything without asking. Her eyes widened with defensiveness. I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought it would be better if I cleaned up a bit. You have so much stuff out everywhere, it's stressful. That was it. The lie I'd been dreading. The same old excuse. She didn't get it. She didn't respect the boundary, and she wasn't acknowledging that this wasn't about her feeling stressed. It was about me feeling respected in my own home. Mom, we've been over this, I said, my voice tight. You can't just throw things out or rearrange my stuff. This is exactly why I didn't want you here in the first place. Her face hardened, and she crossed her arms. I didn't throw anything out. I just moved things around. You're making a big deal out of nothing. And there it was. The complete dismissal of my feelings. The inability to see how much this had hurt me, how much it made me feel like I wasn't being heard. I felt a sharp pang of anger, but I swallowed it. I wasn't going to let this turn into a bigger fight, not in the moment. Instead, I said, I can't do this, Mom. I told you how important this is to me. If you can't respect my space, you can't stay here. She stared at me for a long time, as if weighing her options. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh. Fine. I'll leave. But I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of it. I didn't say anything else. I just watched her pack her things and leave, the weight of disappointment settling over me like a heavy fog. After she left, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of defeat. I had hoped, really hoped, that this time would be different. But it wasn't. It hit me hard, harder than I thought it would. Despite everything, I still wanted my mom to be part of my life, to be part of my future with my husband and children. But her refusal to acknowledge her behavior and respect my boundaries made it impossible. At this point, I realized I couldn't keep making excuses for her. I couldn't keep letting her back into my life with half-hearted promises of change. My home, my future, and my peace of mind were too important. The hardest part was accepting that the mother I wanted wasn't the mother I had. After my mom left that day, I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in my apartment, overwhelmed. I had hoped, for so long, that things would be different, that this time, after everything we talked about, she would respect my boundaries. But instead, the same old pattern had repeated itself. And now, I was left with the weight of that disappointment and confusion. I knew I needed time to process everything. I couldn't just move on from this. This wasn't a small issue. My mom's compulsive need to clean up my space, her disregard for my boundaries, and her refusal to see her behavior as problematic had already affected our relationship for years. But this time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt like a slap in the face. The next few days were hard. I tried to talk myself through it, but my emotions were all over the place. I felt angry, sad, and so conflicted. Part of me still wanted to forgive her. Part of me wanted to believe she'd change. But another part of me, the part that was so fed up with the constant cycle of promises that never came to fruition, was starting to question everything. I reached out to my fiancé, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines. He knew about the situation with my mom. He had seen the way she had crossed boundaries before, and how it had affected me. I explained what happened, and he listened, offering me a safe space to vent. Do you think you can keep having her over? He asked gently. Or do you feel like you need more distance? I was silent for a moment, trying to weigh my options. I wanted so badly to have a good relationship with my mom. I wanted her to be there for me, to be a part of my life, to be a present and supportive grandmother when we eventually had kids. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could trust her anymore. I don't know, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I've given her so many chances, and she just keeps pushing me away. She doesn't see that she's hurting me. And I don't know if I can keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. My fiancé nodded. You don't have to make a decision today. But remember, You deserve to feel safe in your own home. If she can't respect that, then it's okay to take a step back." His words were comforting, but they didn't make the situation any easier. I wasn't sure what to do next. I didn't want to alienate my mom, but I also couldn't keep ignoring my own needs. The days that followed were filled with a mix of reflection and frustration. I tried to think about the past, about all the times my mom had crossed boundaries, all the times I had excused her behavior, hoping she would eventually change. But it was clear now that I couldn't keep waiting for a change that might never come. One evening, as I was looking through some old photos, I came across a picture of us when I was a child, me, sitting on my mom's lap, smiling up at her. It hit me hard. That little girl was still inside me, yearning for a relationship with her mother, wanting the love and support that should have come naturally. But the truth was, my mom had never been able to give me that consistently. She had always been too caught up in her compulsions, in her need to control everything around her, and in her refusal to see her own behavior as a problem. I sat there for a long time, feeling a mixture of grief and exhaustion. I was mourning the mother I had hoped for, the one who would respect my boundaries, who would support me in a healthy way. But I also realized that I couldn't keep waiting for her to change. The truth was, she wasn't going to change, not unless she acknowledged her behavior and sought help. And I couldn't make that decision for her. At some point, I had to choose myself. I thought back to the conversation we'd had before her visit, when I had tried to explain how her behavior hurt me. I realized I had given her every opportunity to understand and respect my boundaries. But the fact was, she hadn't tried hard enough. She hadn't acknowledged her problem or done the work to change. And I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace of mind just to keep the peace with her. I started to think about what I needed in the long term. I couldn't let my mom into my home again unless she took serious steps toward understanding why her behavior was problematic. That meant professional help, therapy, and a willingness to change. I wasn't sure if she'd ever be willing to take that step. But I knew I couldn't keep allowing her into my life without it. A few days after the incident, I sent my mom a message. I didn't want to leave things unresolved, but I also didn't want to give her the false impression that everything was okay. "Mom, I need to be honest with you," I wrote. "I love you, and I want to have a good relationship with you, but I can't keep allowing you to stay at my house unless you're willing to work on your compulsions. I've asked you before, and I've given you chances, but I can't keep putting myself in a position where I'm afraid you'll throw things out or move things around without asking." I paused before hitting send. This felt like one of the hardest things I had ever written. It felt like a final step in cutting ties with the version of my mom I had hoped she could be. But I couldn't keep pretending things were fine when they weren't. I sent the message. Now, I waited. The days that followed my message to my mom felt like an eternity. It wasn't that I was expecting an immediate answer, but I had hoped for something, a response that acknowledged my feelings, a sign that she understood the gravity of what I was saying. Instead, I found myself sitting in this uncomfortable silence, wondering whether my message had even been read, let alone processed. I couldn't help but replay the words over and over in my head, questioning whether I had been too harsh or too blunt. Had I gone too far? Should I have given her more time to change before setting such a firm boundary? But every time I tried to convince myself that I had been too much, the truth hit me. My mom hadn't respected my boundaries for years, and I couldn't continue to put my life on hold hoping she would change. I kept waiting, telling myself that she might just need time to come around. But with each passing day, the silence grew heavier. Finally, after about a week, I received a text message from her. I had been out running errands when my phone buzzed, and I stopped in the middle of the store to check it. The message was short and to the point. "I don't think I need therapy. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. I'm not going to change for you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a rush of frustration and disappointment. This wasn't the answer I had hoped for. It wasn't even close to the understanding I needed. Instead, it felt like she had completely dismissed my feelings and my boundaries, as if my concerns were an inconvenience to her. My hands were shaking as I read the message again. She She hadn't even tried to understand my point of view. She hadn't acknowledged that her behavior was damaging. It was as if she was more concerned with defending her actions than considering the impact they had on me. I wanted to respond immediately, but I knew that wouldn't be productive. In that moment, I realized that my mom wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to see things from my perspective, and she certainly wasn't going to take responsibility for how her actions had affected our relationship. She had made it clear that she wasn't willing to meet me halfway. I sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the screen for a while. I felt a mixture of sadness, anger, and disbelief. I had hoped for something, anything, that would show me she was willing to make an effort. But instead, I had been met with resistance and dismissal. The realization was painful. I had spent so many years trying to make my mom understand me, trying to get her to see that my needs were valid, that my boundaries were not just arbitrary rules, but a way of protecting myself and my future. But after everything, I had to accept that she wasn't capable of doing that. And as much as it hurt, I had to stop trying to change her. I spent the next few hours processing the message, and it was during that time that I began to realize the extent to which I had been enabling my mom's behavior. I had always been so focused on keeping the peace, on maintaining a relationship with her, that I had allowed my boundaries to become negotiable. I had allowed her to disrespect my space and my needs because I was too afraid of losing her. But now, I saw things clearly. I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace of mind just to maintain a relationship that wasn't healthy for me. I had to prioritize my own well-being, and that meant accepting that my mom wasn't going to change, no matter how much I wished she would. I took a deep breath and composed myself. I knew what I had to do now. I wasn't going to respond to her right away. I needed time to think, and I needed to decide how I was going to move forward. I couldn't let her behavior continue to dictate the terms of our relationship. A few days later, I sat down and carefully crafted a response to my mom's message. I wanted to be firm, but I also wanted to be clear about my feelings without getting caught up in an emotional argument. Mom, I wrote, I've thought a lot about what you said, and I need to be honest. I can't keep allowing you to cross my boundaries in my own home. I've given you chances, and I've tried to communicate what I need, but you've made it clear that you're not willing to change. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I love you, but I need to take a step back from our relationship until you're willing to acknowledge that your behavior has been harmful. This isn't just about stuff. This is about me feeling respected and safe in my own space. I hope you can understand that. It was one of the hardest messages I had ever written. The finality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. But I knew it was the right decision. I had to protect myself, even if it meant distancing myself from the person I had hoped could be a source of support and love. I hit send. Then, I waited. After I sent the message, the silence felt different. It wasn't just the kind of silence that comes from an unresolved argument or an uncomfortable conversation. This silence felt heavier, more final. It felt like I had crossed a threshold, one that couldn't be undone. I spent the following days in a haze of uncertainty. The weight of the decision I had made was heavy, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself in a way that wasn't about appeasing someone else's needs or trying to avoid conflict. I had drawn a firm line in the sand, and while it wasn't an easy choice, it felt like the only way forward. But the quiet from my mom still lingered, and I found myself checking my phone constantly, half expecting to hear from her. I didn't know what I was waiting for, an apology, a realization, an explanation, but I knew deep down that whatever it wasn't likely to come. A week passed. Then two. No word from my mom. I started to second-guess myself. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I had overreacted. After all, we had a long history together, and I had always been the one to make the first move when it came to mending our relationship. But this time felt different. The text I had sent was a boundary I had never set before, and it was clear from her response that she wasn't ready, or willing, to meet me halfway. One evening, as I sat on the couch, scrolling through social media, I found myself reflecting on our entire relationship. There had been so many moments when I had quietly accepted my mom's behavior, telling myself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, or that it was just her way of showing love. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been enabling her for years. I had allowed her to dictate the terms of our relationship, compromising my own needs for the sake of keeping the peace. I had always believed that I was helping her, that if I just tried hard enough, I could get her to see how much her behavior affected me. But now, I could see that I wasn't just helping her, I was hurting myself in the process. I had been allowing myself to be drained emotionally, to feel invalidated and disrespected in my own home, all because I wanted my mom to be something she couldn't be. The realization was both freeing and painful. I had spent so much time trying to make things work, trying to fix what was broken, but I had never stopped to ask myself whether it was worth it. Was this the kind of relationship I wanted with my mom? Was I willing to keep sacrificing my peace of mind for the sake of maintaining a relationship that had never been balanced? The truth was, I had been afraid of letting go. Afraid that if I let go, I would lose my mom for good. But now, I was starting to see that I wasn't really losing her. I was losing the idea of her, the version of her that I had created in my mind, the mother I wished she could be. And by holding on to that, I was holding on to the pain and disappointment that came with it. As I reflected on everything, I realized that my decision to take a step back from my mom wasn't just about her behavior, it was about me reclaiming my life. It was about taking control of my boundaries and no longer allowing her compulsions to dictate the way I lived. But even knowing all of this, it didn't make the decision any easier. I still felt sad. I still wanted my mom to understand. I still longed for the mother-daughter bond that I had always hoped for. But at the same time, I knew that I couldn't keep sacrificing my mental and emotional health just to maintain a relationship that wasn't healthy for me. A few days later, as I sat in the kitchen with my fiancé, I told him how I was feeling. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I'm realizing that this is probably the right decision, I said. I can't keep letting her treat me like this. I need to prioritize myself. He nodded, his expression supportive but also empathetic. It's a hard decision, he said gently. But it sounds like you've done everything you can to make things work with her. You've been patient, and you've given her chances. But she's not respecting you. I just wish it didn't have to be this way, I said, the sadness creeping back in. I wish she could see what she's doing. I wish she could understand that I'm not trying to punish her. I just need her to see that I'm not okay with this anymore. I know, he said, rubbing my arm. But sometimes people just aren't ready to change. And it's not your job to make them ready. His words were comforting, but the truth still stung. I wanted to believe that my mom could change, that with enough love and understanding, she would realize what she was doing. But deep down, I knew that change couldn't come from me. It had to come from her. I wasn't sure what the future held for my relationship with my mom. I didn't know if this distance would last forever or if, eventually, she would come around. But for now, I knew I was doing the right thing for myself. As I sat there, I made a promise to myself. I would stop sacrificing my own needs for the sake of someone else's comfort. I would stop letting guilt and fear dictate my boundaries. I had spent too many years trying to fix things that were beyond my control, and I couldn't keep doing that. I didn't know what the next chapter would look like, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. It was time to put myself first. I woke up one Saturday morning, exhausted from the week. The decision to distance myself from my mom had drained me emotionally. I felt a sense of closure, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the lingering sadness. It wasn't that I was entirely ready to let go of the relationship, I wasn't. It was just that, at this point, the ball was in my mom's court. I had done what I could. Now, it was up to her to decide if she wanted to change, to meet me halfway. The house was quiet that morning, just the gentle hum of the coffee maker brewing in the kitchen. I was trying to find peace in the small things, my fiancé's reassuring presence, the routine of our home. But as I sat there, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone, my screen lit up with an unexpected notification. A message. It was from my mom. I took a deep breath before opening it, half expecting the same deflective tone as before. But as I read the words, My heart sank in a way I hadn't anticipated. Can we talk? I'm coming to your place. My first reaction was one of panic. Was she really coming? What did this mean? Was she ready to listen now, or was this just another way for her to ignore the boundaries I had set? 1,000 questions raced through my mind, and I felt my anxiety levels spike. I had been preparing for a longer wait. I didn't expect her to reach out so soon, at least not after the blunt text she had sent me. It felt sudden, and the timing was strange. It had been 2 weeks since I had sent that final message, and in that time, I had started to settle into the idea of taking space from her. I wasn't ready for a confrontation. But here it was, right at my doorstep, literally. I quickly typed back. Why are you coming here? I thought we agreed I needed space. The response came within minutes. I need to talk to you in person. I'm sorry for how I've acted. I realize I've hurt you, and I want to make things right. Please, just let me come over. I felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief, confusion, but also a sense of foreboding. Was this real? Was she genuinely apologizing, or was this another attempt at manipulating me into thinking she was changing? She had done this before, shown a little bit of remorse, promised to change, only to revert to the same behavior after a few weeks. But something in her message made me pause. The word sorry felt sincere, even if I couldn't quite bring myself to fully believe it yet. I texted back, trying to keep my emotions in check. Okay, but only for a short visit. I'm not ready to open up everything yet. There was a long pause before her reply came through, and when it did, it simply said, "Thank you. I'll be there in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I didn't have much time to prepare. I quickly straightened up the apartment, knowing that I wasn't doing it for her but for my own peace of mind. I had no idea how this conversation would go, but I didn't want to feel like I was living in a mess when it happened. As I tidied up, I felt my pulse quicken. What was this conversation going to look like? Would it be the same old pattern of denial, blame shifting, and emotional manipulation? Or was she genuinely ready to listen and understand? My mind was racing, and I couldn't calm myself down. I had spent years hoping for this moment, hoping for the kind of apology that would make everything feel right again. But now that it was here, I didn't know if I was ready to believe it, or if I even wanted to. My phone buzzed again, and I saw that it was a text from my fiancé. He'd gone out for errands but was checking in on me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath and typed back. "I'm about to have a conversation with my mom. I don't know what to expect. Remember to stay firm in your boundaries," he replied. "I'm here if you need me." His words gave me a bit of strength. I wasn't alone in this, even if it felt that way in the moment. My fiancé had been a huge support throughout this entire process, and I knew that no matter what happened with my mom, I wasn't doing this alone. I could hear the sound of a car pulling up outside, and my heart skipped a beat. She was here. I opened the door, and there she was, my mom. She looked a little different somehow. Her usual expression of irritation or impatience was absent, replaced by something more fragile, more uncertain. She stood there for a moment, as if unsure how to begin, before finally speaking. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice quiet. "And I'm sorry. I know I've crossed boundaries, and I want to make things right. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I realize that I've been wrong." Her words, although unexpected, were not as reassuring as I thought they'd be. They sounded almost rehearsed, like she had thought them through, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just what she thought I needed to hear. "Mom," I said, taking a deep breath, "I'm glad you realize that, but this isn't just about the stuff you throw away. It's about my needs, my space, and the way you've disregarded those for years. I can't keep putting my life on hold, hoping you'll change." She nodded, looking down. "I understand that now. I was wrong. I want to be part of your life. I want to be a good mom and a good grandmother, and I've been so focused on my own issues that I haven't been able to see that. but I want to change. I really do. I stared at her for a moment, unsure of what to say. Was this the moment I had been waiting for, or was it just another empty promise? But there was something different this time. She wasn't trying to justify her actions, and she wasn't making excuses. She was simply acknowledging the harm she had caused. I couldn't fully let my guard down, but I knew this was a step in the right direction. It wasn't the grand resolution I had imagined, but it was progress. As my mom sat down on the couch, I could feel the tension in the air. It was a kind of heavy silence that hung between us, thick with years of unresolved feelings. She looked different, softer, almost fragile. It was as if she had shed the protective layers that had kept her from seeing things from my perspective. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. I took a seat across from her, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Her apology had been unexpected, but I wasn't sure if it was enough to erase everything that had come before. I had spent so many years trying to make things work, giving her chances, trying to keep the peace. But now, I had to ask myself, what did this apology really mean? Could I trust it? After a long moment, I finally spoke. It's not just about the things you throw out, Mom. It's about my boundaries, my space. I need to know that I can have my own life without worrying that you'll come in and rearrange it, or throw things away just because they don't fit into your idea of what's necessary. She nodded slowly, her eyes downcast. I get it. I really do. I didn't realize how much I was suffocating you. I thought I was helping. I thought if I cleared out things, it would make your life easier. But I see now that I've been hurting you. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I had been down this road before, hoping for change, only to be let down. I had to be careful. This moment felt different, yes, but was it just a fleeting moment of clarity, or was it the beginning of something more? Mom, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know how to move forward from here. I want to believe you, but I can't just forget everything that's happened. You can't just walk into my life again and expect things to be the way they were. I need to know that you're really going to respect my boundaries this time. I can't have this back and forth anymore. I'm getting married, and I'm planning for a family. I need stability. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time, genuine remorse. I understand. And I want to do better. I've been so wrapped up in my own issues, my own need to control things, that I haven't stopped to think about what you need. I know that now, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it to you. I could feel the sincerity in her words, but I still wasn't sure. I had to ask the hard questions, the ones that had been lurking in my mind for years. Do you really think you can change? You've been like this my whole life, Mom. You've always tried to control things, to clean up or throw things away. And when I asked you to stop, you didn't. I need to know that this time is different. She swallowed hard, her eyes misting over. I don't know if I can completely change overnight. I don't know if I can stop being the way I am. But I do know that I'm willing to try. I'm willing to work on myself, to get help if I need it. I don't want to lose my relationship with you, and I don't want to lose the chance to be a grandmother. I know I've hurt you, but I want to make it right. Her words landed somewhere deep inside of me. There was a part of me that wanted to give in, to believe that this could be the beginning of something better. But there was also a part of me that was scared that I would end up disappointed again, that I would end up giving her another chance only to be let down. I took a deep breath. I can't promise that everything will go back to how it was, Mom. I'm not ready for that. But I'm willing to try, just like you are. We can take this one step at a time. But if you cross my boundaries again, it will be over. I can't keep doing this. I need to know that you're serious. She nodded quickly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I promise. I'll respect your boundaries. I'll work on myself, and I'll do everything I can to be the mom and grandmother you deserve. It wasn't an easy thing to hear. It wasn't the magical moment I had always hoped for, the one where everything suddenly clicked and I felt all the hurt and disappointment from years past fade away. But it was a start. I still wasn't sure what the future would hold. This conversation was one step in a long journey, and I knew it wasn't going to be an easy one. My mom had a lot of work to do, and I had to be prepared for setbacks. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. I stood up and offered my mom a small, tentative smile. "We'll take it one day at a time, okay? No promises, but I'm willing to try if you are." She stood up as well, and to my surprise, she reached out and hugged me. It wasn't a grand, emotional moment, but it felt real. It felt like something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it was enough, but it was something. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. As she left that day, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew that things weren't going to be perfect, and I knew that there was still a lot of work to be done, but I had to believe that this was the beginning of something different. In the end, I couldn't change my mom, and I couldn't control the outcome. But I could control my own actions, my own boundaries, and my own healing. I could protect my peace, and I could be open to the possibility of growth, both for me and for her. It wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was the one we were going to have. The next few days after that conversation were a strange mix of hope and lingering uncertainty. I kept replaying the exchange over and over in my head, trying to make sense of everything. My mom's apology had seemed real, but it was hard to forget the years of hurt that had built up between us. I had told her we could take it one step at a time, but I was still afraid. What if this was just another cycle? What if she would say all the right things, but her actions would fall short, just like they had before? It was a difficult position to be in. Part of me wanted to believe that she could change, and another part of me couldn't let go of the past. I needed to protect myself, but at the same time, I wanted to give her a chance. I didn't want to close the door entirely, but I also couldn't keep opening it only to have it slammed in my face again. I had spent so many years trying to convince myself that everything could go back to normal, only to be disappointed each time. This time, though, I was determined to approach it differently. I wasn't going to ignore my instincts. I wasn't going to ignore the warning signs. But I also wasn't going to shut myself off from the possibility of change. My fiancé could tell I was struggling. He'd been quiet about it at first, knowing I needed to process everything on my own. But now that I had made the decision to let my mom back into my life, he wanted to know what I was thinking. "Are you feeling okay about everything?" he asked one evening, as we sat on the couch. "I can tell you're still worried." I let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know. I keep thinking about everything she's done. She promised to change, but I don't know if I can believe her. I mean, it's been years of this same cycle. She apologizes, says she's going to change, and then, nothing." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I understand that. But you're also not the same person you were back then. You've set clear boundaries now. You've told her what you need. The rest is up to her. You can't change her, but you can control how you respond. And you've made it clear that you won't tolerate things going back to the way they were." I nodded, his words comforting but still not enough to silence the anxiety building in my chest. The truth was, I was scared. I was scared that if I let my mom in too much, I would be overwhelmed with the same old behavior. That if I wasn't vigilant enough, she would slip back into her old habits, and I would lose everything I had worked so hard to protect. But I also had to remind myself that I couldn't control everything. The only thing I could control was how I handled the situation, how I set my own boundaries and enforced them. And I had already made it clear to my mom what those boundaries were. Over the next few days, my mom reached out a few times. She sent me messages asking how I was doing, and if we could set up another time to meet in person. At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. I didn't want to push her away, but I also didn't want to open the door too wide and get hurt again. So, I kept my responses neutral, polite but distant. I didn't want to rush anything. Then, on Friday afternoon, I received a text from her that caught me off guard. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I've decided to go to therapy. I've made an appointment for next week. My heart skipped a beat. Therapy. I didn't expect that. Part of me wanted to be thrilled, but another part of me was cautious. Was she really serious? Was this just another attempt to placate me? Or was she finally ready to take the steps she needed to take in order to change? I sat down and texted her back, trying to keep my tone neutral. That's good to hear, Mom. I hope it helps. Just remember, this is about more than just cleaning up. It's about respecting boundaries, and understanding what I need in my own life. She responded almost immediately. I understand. I'll do better. I promise. The promise felt hollow, but I didn't want to dismiss it outright. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know if she would actually follow through with therapy, or if it was just another phase. And I didn't know if I was ready to trust her again. I spent the weekend with my fiancé, trying to keep myself distracted from the anxiety that had been creeping up. We talked about the future, about our plans for children, and what kind of family we wanted to be. It felt good to focus on us for once, rather than getting lost in the emotional turmoil of my relationship with my mom. Still, I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach whenever I thought about her. What would she do next? Would she stick with therapy? Would she respect my boundaries? Or would she try to force her way back into my life in a way that would only push me further away? On Sunday, she texted me again. I have another appointment for next week. I'm trying, really trying. I want to make things right. I stared at the text for a long time, my mind whirling. What did trying mean? Was it enough? I had no answers. But what I did know was that I couldn't keep questioning everything she did. I had to give her the space to prove herself, even if it meant opening myself up to the possibility of being hurt again. It was a gamble, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to make, but I had no choice but to take it. I sent her one final text before going to bed. I hope you keep going. I really do. But please, don't just do it for me. Do it for yourself. And then, I let out a long breath, knowing that the journey was far from over. The days following my mom's announcement about therapy were a strange mix of hope and skepticism. I kept telling myself that this could be the moment things would shift, that maybe, just maybe, she was finally understanding the gravity of what her behavior had done to me, to our family. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it could all fall apart again. My fiancé, ever the optimist, tried to reassure me. He would listen as I vented, as I worried over every little word or action from my mom. You're doing the right thing by setting boundaries, he'd say. You've already given her the space to change. Now it's her turn to show up. He was right. I had given her a chance, and I was waiting for her to prove that this time was different. But I couldn't help but feel like I was stuck in limbo, unsure of how much longer I could stay in this state of uncertainty. The weeks passed, and I noticed some changes in my mom's behavior. She had sent me a few texts about her therapy sessions, small updates, nothing too deep. But at least she was trying to keep the communication open. It was something, I suppose. It wasn't enough to convince me that she had completely changed, but it was a step in the right direction. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from my mom. I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I need to take responsibility for how I've treated you. I've always been so caught up in my own needs that I haven't seen how it affects you. I'm sorry for all the years I didn't listen. I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't the usual surface-level apology. It felt deeper, more introspective. But still, I was cautious. I had heard these words before, only to have them fall short once the moment passed. I took a deep breath, trying to process my feelings. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to push back, but another part of me wanted to believe that she was finally seeing me, not just as her daughter, but as an individual with my own needs and boundaries. I decided to reply. I appreciate you saying that, Mom. But it's not enough to just apologize. I need to see real change. You've said you're going to therapy, but I need to know that you're actually doing the work to understand why you've treated me the way you have. I pressed send and sat down, waiting for her response. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. I understand. I'm doing the work. It's hard, but I know I have to change. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose the chance to be a part of your life, and the lives of your children. My stomach churned. The words sounded sincere, but was it too late? How many times had I heard promises like these only to be let down? How could I trust that this time would be different? I didn't know the answer, but I also didn't want to shut her out completely. I wanted to believe that she could change, that she could respect the boundaries I had set, but I couldn't do it alone. She had to show me, not just tell me. The next few days were quieter. My mom sent a few more texts, but nothing too significant. I couldn't tell if she was being careful not to overwhelm me or if she was just waiting for me to initiate something. Either way, the silence felt suffocating. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what I wanted moving forward. I had spent so many years being afraid of my mom's behavior, afraid of what she might do if I let her in too much. But now, as I was getting ready to start my own family, I had to face the reality of what it meant to have her in my life. I couldn't just keep her at arm's length forever. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that I had to protect my own peace. My fiancé had been a steady source of support, helping me see that I wasn't asking for too much. I wasn't asking for perfection, just for respect, for boundaries that would allow me to live my life without fear of being overwhelmed by my mom's compulsions. One evening, as we sat together, I turned to him and said, I think it's time. I need to talk to her again. He looked at me with a mixture of encouragement and concern. Are you sure? It's a big step. You've done so much already. I know, I replied, my voice shaking. But I can't keep waiting for the perfect moment. I need to know if this is really something she's willing to work on. If she is, I need to give her the chance to prove it. If she's not, then I need to be strong enough to walk away. He nodded, taking my hand. I'm here for you, no matter what. That night, I texted my mom. I think it's time for us to talk in person. Let's meet for lunch this week. I want to hear more about what you've been working on, and how you're feeling. I sat back after sending the message, my heart racing. Was I ready for this? What if she had made no progress? What if I was setting myself up for another round of disappointment? I had no answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It was time to face the reality of what this relationship could be, and what it couldn't be. And I couldn't do that without giving her the opportunity to show me who she really was now. The day I met my mom for lunch, I felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. It had been a while since we'd had a calm conversation, especially one that wasn't tainted by years of unresolved tension. We had agreed to meet at a small cafe in the neighborhood, one that wasn't too busy, quiet enough for us to talk, but public enough that I would feel somewhat shielded from any emotional outbursts. When I arrived, I saw her sitting at a table by the window, fiddling with her phone. She looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly, but she was trying to maintain a calm demeanor. I took a deep breath before walking over, steeling myself for whatever was to come. Hey, Mom, I greeted, forcing a smile as I slid into the seat across from her. How are you doing? She smiled weakly but immediately launched into an apology. I'm sorry, I've been thinking about everything a lot lately. I don't want you to feel like I'm pushing you or overwhelming you, but I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm really trying to change. I nodded, trying to maintain composure. I know you are, Mom. I just want to hear about it. I want to know what's been going on with you, what kind of work you've been doing in therapy. I need to understand if you're serious about making changes. She paused, taking a deep breath. I've been going to therapy for almost 2 months now. It's harder than I thought it would be. I realized I've been running from my own issues for so long, using clutter and throwing things out as a way to distract myself from the pain. It's like a coping mechanism, and I didn't even realize it until recently. But I'm really trying to dig deeper. I sat there, listening intently. Her words, though heavy, were exactly what I had hoped to hear. She wasn't just making excuses anymore. She was acknowledging her problems. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the years of damage, but it was a step forward. I'm glad to hear that, Mom, I said softly, my voice a little shaky. But there's still a lot of work to be done. You know what happened between us. The way you would just throw things away without asking. The times I would come home to find that my stuff was gone. I don't want that to ever happen again. Her face fell, and for a brief moment, I saw genuine sadness in her eyes. I know. I hurt you. And I didn't realize how much until I saw the look on your face when you told me how much it affected you. I've been selfish, I admit it. I thought I was helping, that I was making things better, but I see now that I wasn't. I exhaled, the weight on my chest lifting slightly. This wasn't the perfect conversation, but it was a conversation I hadn't had with her in years. We were talking honestly, without the usual defensive walls. But it's not just about the things you throw away, Mom, I continued. It's about respect. You can't just come into my life, my home, and take over. You have to respect my boundaries. I've spent years setting these boundaries for a reason, and I can't keep going back to square one every time you promise to change. She nodded slowly. I understand that. I've been working on respecting boundaries in therapy too. I've always thought that I knew best, but I see now that I was ignoring your feelings. I'm sorry for that. I know it's going to take time to rebuild your trust. I don't expect things to change overnight. Her words were slowly making me believe that this time might be different. But there was still one major thing on my mind. Could I trust her to stay committed to this? Could she really keep her promises? We spent the next hour talking about her therapy, her struggles, and how she was trying to confront the deeper issues that had been affecting her behavior. It was a lot to take in, and I was still cautious. But as the conversation went on, I began to realize something. I couldn't keep punishing her for the mistakes she had made in the past, as much as they had hurt me. If she was truly committed to change, then maybe I needed to give her the chance to prove it. We finished our lunch quietly, and when the bill came, I offered to pay. She hesitated before taking out her wallet, but I gently placed my hand on hers. It's okay, Mom. I've got this one. As we walked out of the cafe together, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the street. It felt like a moment of peace between us, a rare occurrence in recent years. We stood there for a moment, both unsure of what to say next. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice cracking slightly. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself. I smiled, though it was bittersweet. Just keep doing the work, Mom. I'm willing to give you a chance, but you have to show me that you're serious about it. We'll take it one step at a time. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I will. I promise. As I drove home later that afternoon, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was real. My mom was finally taking responsibility for her actions, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as I pulled into my driveway and got out of the car, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I wasn't entirely free from the past just yet. I had to continue holding on to the boundaries I had set. I had to protect myself and my family. And most importantly, I had to trust my own instincts, knowing that it was okay to take things slowly, to let my mom prove herself before I allowed her to become an active part of my life again. It wasn't about closing the door entirely. It was about taking small steps forward, one conversation, one moment, at a time. The weeks following that lunch were a strange mix of optimism and caution. It felt like a new chapter in my relationship with my mom, but one I had to write carefully, with deliberate intention. Every time I heard from her, every small gesture she made to show she was still committed to the changes she had promised, I felt a flicker of hope. But at the same time, there was always that lingering fear. What if she reverted back to her old ways? What if, once again, she started throwing things away or crossing boundaries I had so carefully set? I spent a lot of time reflecting on the conversation we had at lunch. I realized that I had been holding on to a lot of resentment, a lot of anger that had built up over the years. It wasn't easy to let that go, to even consider the possibility of trusting my mom again. But what I came to understand was that letting go of the anger didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant giving myself the freedom to move forward, to open myself to the idea of healing, without being held captive by the mistakes she had made. It wasn't just for her, it was for me. My fiancé and I had started talking more seriously about the future, about our plans for a family and what that would mean in terms of involving our parents. We both agreed that we didn't want to raise our children in a toxic environment, and that meant establishing clear boundaries with both of our families. It was a difficult conversation to have, but it was necessary. I wasn't going to allow my mom's behavior to impact my future children. Not again. At the same time, I recognized that my mom wanted to be involved in their lives. She wanted to be a grandmother. The thought of her being around, helping me with the kids, felt so conflicting. Part of me wanted to embrace the idea, but another part of me was terrified of the old patterns resurfacing. I couldn't let her come into my home, into my life, without knowing that she had done the necessary work to respect my boundaries and my space. I decided to give her another opportunity, but with strict conditions. I texted her one afternoon, after a few weeks of observing her behavior. "Hey, Mom. I've been thinking about everything you've said, and I'm open to having you stay over again, but there are some things we need to discuss first. I need to make sure we're on the same page about boundaries, especially when it comes to my things." I waited nervously for her response, unsure of how she would react. But when the message came through, I was relieved. She was receptive, and she didn't push back. "Of course, I understand. I'll respect whatever boundaries you set." I was cautious, but I made the decision to slowly start incorporating her back into my life. It wasn't going to be a free pass, not by any means, but I felt that she had earned a little bit of trust. She had made the effort to show me that she was trying to change. Now it was time to see if she could follow through. She visited a few weeks later, staying for a couple of days. I had planned everything carefully, making sure to keep my space organized and prepared for her visit. I set clear boundaries, making sure she knew that if she crossed any lines, there would be consequences. And when she arrived, I could see that she was nervous. She seemed almost anxious about whether or not I would be satisfied with her behavior. The first few hours were tense, but nothing happened. No items were moved, no drawers were rifled through. She actually respected the space I had created for myself. I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells for the first time in years, and that was a huge relief. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, she turned to me and said, "I know I've done a lot of damage. I can't take it back, but I can do better. I want to be a good mom and a good grandmother to your children. I just need you to know that I'm trying." I looked at her, trying to read her face. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its difficulties, but for the first time in years, I believed her. I believed that she was making an honest effort to change. She was still my mom, but she was also a woman trying to heal and evolve. And maybe, just maybe, I could allow myself to move forward with her. I didn't know if she would continue to honor the boundaries I had set. I didn't know if this was the start of something real or if it would all come crashing down again. But what I did know was this: I had given her a chance. I had opened the door, even if it was just a crack, and I was allowing myself to trust her again, at least in small doses. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But it was progress. And sometimes, progress is all you can hope for. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, on the years of frustration, the pain, the moments of healing, I realized something important. Healing wasn't just about her changing, it was about me changing too. I had learned how to set and enforce boundaries, how to protect my space, and how to let go of the things I couldn't control. But most importantly, I had learned that it was okay to be hopeful. It was okay to believe that change was possible, even if it took time. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with where I was, with the decision I had made, and with the future ahead. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. I wasn't doing this for anyone else, I was doing it for me. And that, in the end, was the most important thing of all. With that, the journey wasn't over, but I knew I had taken the right steps. And I had learned one thing: sometimes, the only way forward is by giving people the chance to prove they can change, while trusting yourself to walk away if it doesn't work out. That's how I found the strength to move forward.